Don't skip this. Last night your soulmate chose between you and someone else. Stay here. Please don't scroll, don't distract yourself, don't tell yourself you'll come back later, because this moment wasn't random, and what you're about to hear is meant for you at the exact stage you're in right now. Not the version of you from the past. Not the version you're trying to be. The you who is tired of guessing, tired of waiting, tired of feeling something heavy in your chest without knowing why. Last night, while you were trying to sleep, while your phone was face down, while your mind replayed the same unanswered questions, your soulmate stood at a quiet emotional crossroads. It wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices, no big confessions, no obvious signs you could have seen from the outside. It was internal. Private. The kind of moment that changes everything without making a sound. They were choosing. Not in the way movies show it. Not by saying a name out loud or making a final decision in one clean moment. It was subtler than that. It was a series of thoughts. Memories. Feelings that came back when they least expected them. They thought about you. About how you make them feel seen. About the way your presence calms them instead of excites them into chaos. About the depth you bring that they don't experience everywhere. And at the same time, they thought about someone else. Someone easier. Someone lighter. Someone who doesn't ask them to look too deeply at themselves. Someone who feels safer because the connection doesn't demand growth. Someone who doesn't challenge their patterns or reflect their unresolved wounds back to them. This wasn't about who is better. It was about who requires more honesty. You see, you represent something real to them. Something grounded. Something that doesn't disappear when things get uncomfortable. And that kind of connection is beautiful. But it's also confronting. It asks a person to show up fully, to stop hiding, to stop delaying, to stop choosing half measures. The other option didn't ask that. And that's why the choice was so heavy. Your soulmate felt it in their body. That pressure in the chest. That familiar urge to postpone. To not decide yet. To stay in the gray where nothing has to be resolved. But something shifted last night. The gray stopped feeling neutral. It started feeling like avoidance. They couldn't ignore it anymore. They realized that by not choosing, they were still choosing. They were choosing confusion. They were choosing delay. They were choosing to let someone else's heart sit in uncertainty. And that realization didn't sit well with them. What you may not know is that your energy has changed recently. You stopped reaching in the same way. You stopped filling the silence. You stopped trying to hold the connection together on your own. Even if you didn't say anything out loud, they felt it. Your absence of effort was louder than any message. It forced them to feel the weight of the situation instead of floating above it. They asked themselves hard questions last night. Why do I feel pulled toward them when things get quiet? Why does the idea of losing them feel heavier than I expected? Why does the easier option suddenly feel empty? These questions didn't bring instant clarity, but they cracked something open. And here's the part that matters most for you to hear: the choice they made wasn't just about who to move toward. It was about who they are ready to become. That's why this moment feels intense even if nothing has happened yet. You may have woken up today feeling off. Restless. Emotional without a clear reason. That wasn't coincidence. Emotional decisions create ripples, especially when there's a deep bond involved. Your nervous system felt the shift before your mind could explain it. Your soulmate didn't sleep well last night. They replayed conversations. They remembered small moments you probably don't even realize mattered so much. The way you listened. The way you didn't judge. The way you held space for them when they were unsure of themselves. And they contrasted that with the other connection. The surface-level comfort. The distraction. The lack of depth. They saw the difference more clearly than ever before. But here's the truth you need to hear, even if it's uncomfortable: choosing you is not just choosing love for them. It's choosing responsibility. It's choosing to grow. It's choosing to stop hiding behind excuses like bad timing, or needing space, or not being ready. And not everyone is brave enough for that. This doesn't mean they didn't feel love for you. It means they were afraid of what loving you fully would require of them. That fear doesn't disappear overnight. Last night, they stood between two paths. One path allowed them to stay the same. The other required them to change. And for a moment, just a moment, they saw clearly what each path would cost them. You may be wondering, did they choose you? The answer is more layered than a simple yes or no. They chose truth. They chose to stop lying to themselves about what you mean to them. They chose to stop pretending the connection was casual or uncertain when it wasn't. They chose to acknowledge that you are not interchangeable. That doesn't mean they've suddenly become perfect or fearless. But it means the denial cracked. And once denial cracks, things cannot go back to how they were. This is why the energy feels different today. This is why you might feel like something is coming, even if you don't know what. This is why patience feels heavier now than it did before. Because the universe doesn't bring awareness without movement following it. Something is shifting. Not because you forced it. Not because you chased it. But because you stopped abandoning yourself. Your soulmate felt that. They realized that the version of you who quietly waits forever is gone. And that realization made the choice real in a way it never was before. Now listen carefully, because this next part is important for you. Whatever they choose to do next is not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their readiness. If they step forward, it will be because they decided to face themselves. If they hesitate, it will be because they're still negotiating with fear. Either way, you are no longer stuck in limbo. That chapter is closing. You are not meant to compete for love. You are not meant to be an option someone weighs against comfort or convenience. You are meant to be chosen freely, clearly, and without hesitation. Last night's choice wasn't the end of the story. It was the moment the story became honest. And honesty always changes the direction things are going, even if the outcome hasn't fully revealed itself yet. Stay present today. Pay attention to how you feel. Don't rush to reach out. Don't rush to withdraw either. Let things surface on their own. When someone makes an internal choice, the external world follows, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly. This is only the beginning of what's about to unfold. And the most important thing to remember is this. You didn't lose anything last night. You reclaimed your place in the truth. Stay with me, because what comes next will make everything clearer. Stay with me a little longer, because this part goes deeper than the choice itself. This is where you begin to understand what that moment last night actually unlocked, not just for your soulmate, but for you. This is where the silence after the choice starts to speak. After a decision is made internally, there's always a pause. A strange, heavy quiet. It's the space between realization and action. Your soulmate is in that space right now. Not running. Not celebrating. Just sitting with the truth they finally allowed themselves to see. And that truth didn't feel clean or heroic. It felt exposing. They saw how long they had stayed undecided. How long they had allowed someone else's heart to sit in uncertainty. How they benefited from your patience while avoiding accountability. That awareness is uncomfortable. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like being seen by your own conscience. That's why things haven't rushed forward yet. Growth doesn't move fast when it's real. Your soulmate is replaying moments that didn't seem important before. Times when you showed up without being asked. Times when you gave them space without being cold. Times when you chose understanding over accusation. Those moments look different now, because they can finally see them without hiding from what they meant. They realize something that hurts in a very specific way: you loved them without asking them to perform. And that kind of love is rare. At the same time, they're seeing the other connection more honestly. Not with judgment, not with cruelty, but with clarity. They see how much of it was built on ease instead of depth. How it required very little emotional risk. How it allowed them to stay the same. And for the first time, that sameness doesn't feel comforting. It feels empty. This doesn't mean they suddenly stopped caring about the other person. It means they stopped confusing distraction with connection. And that distinction changes everything. But here's the part you need to hear clearly, without romanticizing it: awareness does not automatically become courage. Your soulmate now knows what you represent. They know what the connection asks of them. They know what choosing you would mean. And that knowledge is heavy. Because choosing you would require them to act differently than they have before. It would require consistency. It would require honesty. It would require ending patterns that once felt safe. That's a lot for someone who has spent a long time avoiding decisive moments. So right now, they are wrestling with themselves. Not with love. Not with desire. But with fear. Fear of failing. Fear of being exposed. Fear of not being able to meet the depth they now recognize. And while they're in that internal struggle, you are doing something very different. You are no longer chasing clarity. You are no longer leaning forward emotionally. You are watching. That shift is subtle, but it's powerful. And they feel it. They feel the absence of your emotional labor. The absence of you smoothing things over. The absence of reassurance. It's not punishment, it's consequence. It's the natural result of you stepping back into yourself. This is important. You did not step back to provoke a reaction. You stepped back because you reached a limit. And limits change dynamics. Your soulmate is now facing something they didn't expect: the possibility that you might not wait forever. That you might not be available in the same unconditional way. That your presence is no longer guaranteed simply because they're undecided. That realization is sobering. It forces them to confront the cost of inaction. For a long time, they believed that by delaying, they were avoiding loss. Now they're realizing that delay itself is a loss. A slow one. A quiet one. But a real one. They can feel you slipping out of the role you once played. Not leaving. Not disappearing. Just no longer orbiting them. That's what changed last night. You may be wondering why this feels so heavy even though nothing has been said yet. Why your body feels alert. Why your emotions feel close to the surface. That's because unresolved truth creates tension before it creates resolution. You're standing in that tension now. And here's the part that's crucial for you to understand: this tension is not asking you to do more. It's asking you to hold your ground. Your instinct may be to reach out. To check in. To ask where you stand. To relieve the discomfort of waiting. But pause. Not because waiting is noble, but because chasing clarity now would pull you back into the old dynamic. Right now, clarity belongs to the person who created the confusion. Let them sit with it. Let them feel what it's like to be unsure without you cushioning the experience. This is not about power games. It's about balance. For the first time, the emotional weight is not all on you. And that's exactly how it needs to be for anything real to move forward. Your soulmate may reach out soon. Or they may hesitate a little longer. Either response will tell you something important. Not through words, but through timing, tone, and intention. Pay attention to how they show up. Do they come with honesty or avoidance? Do they acknowledge the impact of their indecision? Do they speak clearly, or keep things vague? You don't need to interrogate them. You don't need to demand answers. Their behavior will speak. And here's where your growth shows. You are no longer measuring your worth by their choice. You are measuring alignment. That's new. You're asking yourself different questions now. Does this feel respectful? Does this feel mutual? Does this feel grounded? These questions protect you in a way hope never could. If they step forward with clarity and accountability, you will feel it immediately. Not as adrenaline. Not as anxiety. But as calm. As relief. As a sense of things settling into place. If they don't, you will feel that too. And this time, you won't override it. Because you trust yourself now. That trust is the real outcome of this moment. Not the choice they made, but the one you made earlier when you stopped abandoning yourself. You didn't know it at the time, but that choice shifted everything. It forced truth to the surface. It forced them to look at themselves. It freed you from waiting in silence. Whatever comes next will come from that truth. And that means even if the path ahead is uncertain, it will no longer be dishonest. That's the difference. You are no longer standing in the dark. You are standing in awareness. And from here, you will not accept half answers, half effort, or half love. You don't need to say that out loud. Your presence already communicates it. Stay grounded. Stay observant. Stay with yourself. the next movement will come. And when it does, you will be ready, not desperate, not guarded, but clear. That clarity is your power now. And nothing that happens next can take it away. Stay with me, because this part isn't about what your soulmate does next, it's about what settles inside you while you wait. This is where the story quietly shifts hands. Where control moves from uncertainty into awareness. Where you stop standing on the edge of someone else's decision and begin standing firmly inside your own life again. Right now, there is a strange calm mixed with tension. You might feel it in your chest or your stomach. Not panic. Not peace either. Something in between. That's because you're no longer blind, but the path ahead hasn't fully revealed itself yet. This space feels unfamiliar because you're used to either hoping or hurting. This middle ground, where you're simply present, is new. Your soulmate is still processing. But what's changed is that you're no longer waiting the same way you used to. Before, waiting meant shrinking. Waiting meant staying available at all costs. Waiting meant putting your life on pause emotionally. Now, waiting feels different. It feels active, not passive. You're not holding your breath. You're breathing through it. And that difference is everything. You've begun to notice how much energy you once spent monitoring someone else's emotional weather. You anticipated their moods. You adjusted your tone. You softened your needs. You explained yourself twice just to avoid tension. You thought that was love. Now you see it more clearly. That was survival. Love doesn't require you to disappear. Love doesn't ask you to stay quiet so someone else can stay comfortable. Love doesn't put you in a permanent state of almost. This realization didn't come overnight. It arrived slowly, through exhaustion. Through disappointment that kept repeating. Through the quiet realization that no matter how patient you were, clarity never arrived on its own. That's why this moment feels so different now. Your soulmate's choice last night cracked open a truth. But your growth is what gave that truth weight. If you were still the version of yourself who waited endlessly, that choice might not have mattered. But you're not that person anymore. You changed first. And when one person changes, the entire dynamic shifts. Your soulmate feels that shift even if they don't fully understand it. They feel that you're no longer reaching for reassurance. That you're not filling the silence. That you're not trying to fix the distance. That absence of effort isn't indifference, it's self-respect. That's unsettling for someone who benefited from your emotional availability without having to fully commit. They're now sitting with a question they avoided for a long time. What happens if I lose them, not because they left, but because I didn't step up? That question lingers. And while they sit with it, you are rediscovering parts of yourself that were quietly put aside. You're noticing how your days feel when you're not emotionally tethered to their response time. You're noticing how your mind feels when you stop replaying conversations. You're noticing how much space opens up when you stop carrying uncertainty that was never yours to hold. That space feels strange at first. Then it starts to feel peaceful. You may still think about them. Of course you do. A deep bond doesn't dissolve instantly. But the thoughts are different now. They're not desperate. They're not consuming. They don't spiral. You think of them, and then you come back to yourself. That's new. You're also beginning to understand something important. The choice your soulmate made last night didn't instantly solve anything. It revealed something. And revelation is often uncomfortable before it's liberating. They saw clearly that staying undecided was no longer neutral. That keeping two emotional doors open meant risking losing both. That you are not someone who can exist in the background while they figure themselves out indefinitely. But seeing that doesn't automatically make them ready to act with integrity. Readiness is built, not wished into existence. And here's where your power comes in. You are no longer trying to push readiness into them. You're allowing their actions, or lack of them, to show you who they are now, not who they could be someday. That shift protects you. Because hope without evidence keeps people stuck. But observation with self-trust sets people free. You're watching how they handle discomfort. You're watching whether they move toward clarity or retreat into vagueness. You're watching whether they respect your space or try to pull you back into confusion. And for the first time, you're not afraid of what you might see. That's growth. There's a quiet grief underneath this stage. Grief for the version of the connection you wanted it to be. Grief for the future you imagined. Grief for the idea that love alone would be enough to carry you through uncertainty. That grief deserves compassion. You didn't imagine wrong. You just imagined with someone who wasn't standing in the same place emotionally. And now you're allowing that truth to exist without trying to rewrite it. You're also learning that being chosen doesn't mean much if the choice comes from fear of loss rather than desire for alignment. You don't want to be chosen because someone is afraid to lose you. You want to be chosen because they see you clearly and still step forward. Anything less would cost you yourself. This is why you're no longer tempted to chase answers. Because answers without consistency don't heal anything. They just delay the inevitable. What heals is congruence. Words matching actions. Intentions matching effort. Feelings matching responsibility. You're not asking for perfection. You're asking for presence. And that request is reasonable. As days pass, you'll notice how your nervous system continues to settle. You're less reactive. Less triggered by uncertainty. Less consumed by, what if? That doesn't mean you don't care, it means you've stopped confusing anxiety with love. You're learning that love should feel grounding, not destabilizing. If your soulmate reaches out from a place of honesty, you'll feel it immediately. Not as adrenaline, not as butterflies, but as relief. As clarity. As something clicking into place. If they don't, you'll feel that too, and it won't destroy you. That's the difference now. You've built something inside yourself that doesn't collapse when someone else hesitates. You're no longer standing in front of love asking to be chosen. You're standing beside yourself, open to what aligns. And that changes the entire trajectory of your life. This chapter is no longer about competition. It's not about being compared to someone else. It's not about proving your worth. That narrative has ended. The new narrative is simpler and stronger. I will not abandon myself to stay connected. That truth will guide every decision you make from here. Whatever your soulmate chooses next, action, silence, clarity, retreat, it will meet a version of you who is awake, grounded, and no longer available for half-love. That's not a threat. It's a boundary. And boundaries don't push the right people away. They invite the right ones closer. Stay present. Stay honest. Stay rooted in yourself. The next chapter isn't being written by their confusion anymore. It's being written by your self-respect. And that is a story that always leads somewhere better. Stay with me, because this part is where the waiting finally loses its power over you. Not because everything is suddenly clear, not because your soulmate has made a loud declaration, but because something far more important has happened quietly inside you. This is where you stop standing in the shadow of someone else's decision and start standing fully in your own life again. You may notice that your days feel different now. The hours aren't measured by checking your phone. Your mood doesn't rise and fall with imagined signals. You still think about them, yes, but the thoughts don't hijack you anymore. They pass through instead of taking over. That shift didn't happen because the situation resolved. It happened because you resolved something within yourself. For a long time, uncertainty felt like a threat. It made your body tense, your mind race, your heart ache. You treated clarity like oxygen, something you desperately needed in order to breathe. But now, you're breathing even without answers. That's not because you stopped caring. It's because you stopped believing that your peace must come from someone else's choice. That belief was never fair to you. You're beginning to see how much of your emotional life used to be placed on hold. How many decisions you postponed. How many feelings you softened. How many needs you delayed, all in the name of waiting to see what happens. You didn't call it self-abandonment back then. You called it patience. Love. Understanding. Now you can name it more honestly. You were living in suspension. And suspension is exhausting. This stage isn't dramatic. There's no big emotional release or final conversation yet. It's quieter than that. It's the slow return of your attention to yourself. You notice the food you eat. The music you enjoy. The way your body feels when you move through the day without constantly scanning for emotional danger. You're not numb. You're present. That presence changes how everything feels. Your soulmate, wherever they are emotionally right now, is no longer the center of your inner world. They are part of the story, but not the author of your days. That's a subtle but massive shift. And it happened because you stopped trying to control the outcome and started honoring your experience. You no longer tell yourself stories to make waiting feel noble. You don't romanticize uncertainty anymore. You don't say, if it's meant to be, it'll work out, just to avoid facing discomfort. You've learned that destiny doesn't require you to disappear. If something is meant to grow, it grows through truth. You also begin to understand that the choice your soulmate faced wasn't just between you and someone else. It was between clarity and avoidance. Between growth and familiarity. Between stepping forward and staying comfortable. That kind of choice doesn't resolve itself overnight. And that's okay. Because you are no longer living on standby while they figure themselves out. This is one of the hardest lessons to learn. You can love someone deeply and still refuse to pause your life for their indecision. You can care without chasing. You can hope without shrinking. Those things can exist together, but only when you stop betraying yourself. You've stopped now. You feel it in how you speak. There's less explanation. Less justification. Less overthinking. You don't feel the need to clarify your worth or your intentions. You trust that the right people will understand without you having to perform emotional gymnastics. That trust is new. It didn't come from confidence at first. It came from exhaustion. From reaching the end of what you were willing to tolerate. From realizing that no amount of patience can replace mutual effort. You didn't harden. You grounded. And grounding feels different than guarding. You're not closed off. You're open. But you're standing on solid ground now instead of leaning into uncertainty. You also start noticing something else: your standards have shifted. Not in a rigid, defensive way, but in a calm, non-negotiable way. You don't fantasize about potential as much. You care more about how things feel consistently, not occasionally. You pay attention to how someone shows up on ordinary days, not just emotionally charged moments. This isn't pessimism. It's maturity. You've learned that love is not proven through intensity, longing, or dramatic choices. It's proven through reliability, honesty, and presence. Through someone choosing you not once, but over and over again in small, unglamorous ways. That's what you want now. And because you know that, you're no longer afraid of what your soulmate might decide next. You're curious, but not consumed. You're open, but not attached to a specific outcome. You know that whatever unfolds, you will meet it with awareness instead of desperation. That's power. There's still sadness here. Of course there is. You're letting go of the version of the story where love alone solved everything. You're grieving the fantasy that patience would eventually be rewarded without requiring difficult conversations or clear action. That grief is real. But it's clean grief. It doesn't loop endlessly. It doesn't turn inward. It moves through you and leaves space behind. In that space, something surprising happens. You start imagining a future that isn't centered on waiting. A future where you don't have to guess. Where you don't have to wonder if you're chosen. Where love feels steady instead of suspenseful. You don't need to know who that future includes yet. You just know how you want it to feel. That clarity becomes your compass. If your soulmate steps forward from a place of honesty and accountability, you will feel it immediately. Not as chaos. Not as relief mixed with fear. But as calm recognition. As something aligning instead of pulling you off center. If they don't, you will grieve, but you will not collapse. Because your identity is no longer tied to being chosen. You chose yourself first. And that choice quietly rewired everything. This is the phase where people around you may start noticing a difference, even if they can't name it. You seem calmer. More present. Less reactive. You're not seeking validation. You're not oversharing. You're not performing emotional labor for others. You're just there. Solid. That solidity doesn't push love away. It invites the right kind of love in. You're no longer available for confusion. Not because you're angry, but because you respect yourself too much to live in emotional limbo again. That respect is the foundation of everything that comes next. So if you're wondering what this part is about, it's about this. The moment you stop waiting for life to begin again and realize it already has. Your soulmate's choice was a catalyst. Your growth was the transformation. Whatever happens next will meet a version of you who is awake, steady, and no longer willing to disappear to be loved. And from here, the story can only move forward. Not from fear. Not from hope alone. But from truth. Stay with me, because this part is not about what finally happens between you and your soulmate. It's about what has already happened inside you, and how that quietly changes the rest of your life, no matter who walks beside you next. This is the part people rarely talk about, because it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. But on the inside, it's everything. You're no longer waiting in the same way. Not because you stopped caring, not because hope disappeared, but because waiting itself lost its grip on you. It doesn't define your mornings anymore. It doesn't sit beside you when you try to fall asleep. It doesn't control how you see yourself. There was a time when waiting felt like loyalty. Like devotion. Like proof that you loved deeply. You told yourself that if you were patient enough, understanding enough, quiet enough, love would eventually land where it belonged. You didn't see it then, but waiting had slowly turned into self-erasure. Now you see it clearly. And seeing it doesn't make you angry. It makes you honest. You're honest about how much it hurt to feel like an option. Honest about how exhausting it was to live in emotional suspense. Honest about how many times you silenced your own needs to keep the connection alive. That honesty doesn't break you, it steadies you. You're no longer trying to be chosen. You're deciding what you choose. That shift is subtle, but it's permanent. You can feel it in your body. The tightness that once lived in your chest has softened. The constant low-level anxiety has quieted. You're not scanning conversations for hidden meaning anymore. You're not replaying interactions to see if you said the wrong thing. You're not bracing for disappointment the way you used to. You're calmer, not because life suddenly became easier, but because you stopped fighting yourself. That fight was always the hardest part. You stopped trying to convince yourself that uncertainty was romantic. You stopped calling confusion depth. You stopped treating emotional inconsistency as something to endure. And in doing that, you reclaimed something essential. Your dignity. Dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't make speeches. It simply shows up in the choices you make when no one is forcing you. It shows up when you don't reach out just to relieve discomfort. When you don't over-explain your worth. When you don't stay where clarity is always postponed. You carry that dignity now. And because you do, you move through the world differently. You're more present in conversations. You listen without trying to anticipate rejection. You speak without shrinking your truth. You don't feel the urge to prove yourself anymore, because you're no longer questioning whether you're enough. You already know. This doesn't mean you've closed your heart. In fact, your heart is more open than before. But it's open with boundaries. Open with discernment. Open without self-betrayal. You still believe in love. You still believe in connection. You still believe in soul-deep bonds. But you no longer believe that love requires confusion, fear, or competition. That belief died quietly. And what replaced it was something far more stable. Self-trust. You trust yourself to notice when something feels off. You trust yourself to speak when something matters. You trust yourself to walk away if staying costs you your peace. That trust didn't come from confidence, it came from experience. From heartbreak that taught you what you will and will not tolerate. From waiting that taught you the cost of silence. From loving someone who wasn't ready that taught you the value of readiness. You didn't lose this chapter. You learned from it. Your soulmate may still be in your orbit in some way. Or they may slowly fade from the center of your story. Either possibility no longer terrifies you. You're no longer clinging to outcomes. You're allowing life to unfold while staying rooted in yourself. That's not detachment. That's alignment. You don't need closure from them anymore. You created closure by choosing clarity over confusion. You don't need them to explain their choice. You understand it now, not intellectually, but emotionally. They chose from where they were. You chose from where you are. And those places are different. That difference isn't about superiority or blame. It's about timing, awareness, and courage. You reached a point where you could no longer stay in emotional limbo. They may or may not be there yet. And that's okay. Because you're not living your life on pause anymore. You're noticing small joys again. Music hits differently. Silence feels peaceful instead of heavy. You enjoy your own company without wondering if something is missing. You don't feel incomplete. You feel whole. There are still moments of sadness. Of course there are. You invested emotionally. You imagined a future. You cared deeply. Letting go of those dreams isn't painless. But the sadness no longer defines you. It visits. It speaks. Then it leaves. It doesn't stay. And when it leaves behind clarity, not emptiness. You're also beginning to recognize something powerful. You don't want love that requires you to shrink, wait, or compete. You want love that meets you where you stand. Love that chooses you without hesitation. Love that feels calm, not chaotic. You didn't lower your standards. You finally named them. That naming will guide everything from here on out. Every relationship. Every connection. Every emotional investment. You won't give your heart to uncertainty again and call it destiny. You'll call it what it is, and you'll choose differently. One day, you'll look back on this moment and realize it was a turning point. Not because your soulmate chose or didn't choose you, but because you chose yourself without closing your heart. That's the part that matters. You didn't become bitter. You didn't become guarded. You didn't lose your capacity to love. You simply stopped sacrificing yourself to keep love alive. That choice reshaped your future. And whatever love comes next, whether it's with this soulmate or someone entirely new, it will arrive to a version of you who is grounded, aware, and no longer willing to disappear to be loved. That version of you is not going anywhere. This chapter doesn't end with an answer from someone else. It ends with an answer from you. And that answer is steady, clear, and unshakable. You are no longer waiting. You are living. And from here, everything unfolds differently.